This week's top story comes out of Tallahassee, where Ryan Nickel of FloridaPolitics.com broke news this week that Governor Ron Desantis approved 8 new medical cannabis licenses. Getting to this point has taken a lot of hard work and a lot of confusion. Let's talk about how we got here. So in 2014, the Florida legislature, through the Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act, legalized the cultivation, processing, and dispensing of low THC cannabis for qualified patients in the state of Florida. The law set out in 2014, the low THC law, we'll call it, authorized the establishment of 5 dispensing organizations in 5 regions throughout Florida. These dispensing organizations will later be translated into MMTCs, Medical Marijuana Treatment Centers, which is the term we use today. The law that implemented the low THC program directed the Department of Health to adopt rules to implement the law, and these rules included the initial application requirements for these dispensing organizations, or MMTCs. So around June of 2015, the department adopted initial application requirements. So entities that wanted to become low THC dispensing organizations had to apply by July of 2015, only a month later. Under this old program, because we implemented a new program in 2017, but under this low THC program, Florida's first medical cannabis program, applicants were required to be nurseries that were at least 30 years old. Supposedly, only 23 applicants qualified. So under the low THC program, the nurseries applied and 5 licenses were issued. In November of that same year, 2015, Curaleaf, Knox Medical, Liberty Health Sciences, Sutera, and TrueLeaf were all granted licenses. These 5 are the 5 big power players in the state of Florida, and they're also the first 5 businesses to get licenses. So in the middle of this application process, and after the 5 licenses were awarded, the other 23 applicants, didn't understand why they did not get their licenses. So a lot of them ended up suing the state of Florida. And in 2016, 1 year later, 2 companies, Harvest and Grow Healthy, each receive a license arising out of this litigation. So while these lawsuits were still happening, in November of 2016, Florida voters overwhelmingly approved Amendment 2 by 71% of the vote. Amendment 2 is the constitutional amendment that expanded our medical cannabis program. Expanded the qualifying conditions because in the old program, only terminally ill patients could get cannabis. Now we have around 13 conditions. It also translated the language from dispensing organizations to MMTCs, and it expanded product options. When the amendment passed, most people assumed that it was self-implementing, and by that I mean the legislator wasn't required to get involved. But, as we've seen multiple times, the legislator continues to insert themselves in the middle of what voters want. So, part of the amendment assigns certain rules to the Department of Health to implement the program. And January of 2017, just 2 months later, the amendment takes effect. So in January of 2017, under Amendment 2, entities started to apply to become MMTCs. There were hundreds of applicants after Amendment 2 went into law, compared to the 28 selected applicants who applied under the old low THC law. Now, these applications to become MMTCs, Medical Marijuana Treatment Centers, aren't your 2-page employee application to work at a fast food restaurant. These applications are sometimes 1,000+ pages long and include many things like financial solvency, business ownership structure, security, product testing, and the list goes on. Very rigorous applications. So in 2017, applicants started to apply for the licenses. Immediately in January of 2017, that same month, the Department of Health started to deny applications. Nothing happened. Fast forward to May of 2017, Florida's legislative session ended without the passage of any legislation relating to the implementation of the amendment. So, they panicked. In June of 2017, Rick Scott called for a special session, and in this session, the legislature enacted Senate Bill 8A, which became effective in June. This law are the actual rules of the program, which is now Florida Statute 381.986, if you want to look it up and read it. Now, the Florida legislature imposed different requirements in and around the amendment in implementing the amendment into law. For example, the legislature enacted a vertical mandatory integration system. Under the vertical integration program that we have in Florida, if you're an MMTC, you have to grow, process, distribute, transport, and sell the plant, all your products, versus a horizontal market where if you just wanted to be a retailer or you just wanted to be a grower, you can get a license specifically for that. In Florida, if you want a license, you have to do from seed to sale. You have to do it all. This vertical integration is a barrier in of on itself, and the legislator, in enacting the Amendment 2, also implemented the smoking ban. So this law gave all the rules for the new program. The law directed the Department of Health to license 10 more MMTCs by October of 2017. So under the new law, the department was supposed to go back and reconsider some of the licenses that were originally denied. So they had to go back and look at applicants who had legal challenges, who had lawsuits pending as of January of 2017, or who had scored within 1 point of the highest ranked applicants in the 5 regions. No licenses to this day have been issued via this mandate. The Department of Health ends up ignoring the October 2017 deadline, and the Department of Health refused to issue any new licenses. And they also have not opened up application processing at all. So out of these 10 licenses, the law that's implemented required that at least one of these licenses were reserved for a minority applicant, and specifically an applicant that fell within the Pigford class. Being a member of the Pigford class means that you have special privilege to obtain an MMTC license. In addition to one of these licenses reserved for a minority applicant, 2 licenses were reserved to facilities who process citrus fruits. Now, there's a lawsuit going on right now that argues the legislator implementing these special advantages is unconstitutional. So at this point, October passes, the Florida Department of Health does nothing, but more dispensaries get licenses. All of these dispensaries, VitaCann, MedMin, GTI, Columbia Care Florida, AltMed, and 3 Boys Farm all got licenses because they all arose out of lawsuits they had with the Department of Health. So these entities were all low THC applicants that ended up selling their licenses. GTI acquired Keith Street Germain Nursery. MedMen acquired Treadwell. 3 Boys is now Harvest, after being bought by Sol, who was bought by Vertano, who was bought by Harvest. Acreage was Nature's Way, etc. So, applicants who applied under the new law, under Amendment 2, started suing the Department of Health, which the main one being Florigrown. So at this point, we have 2 groups of angry people. The first are a group of the 23 applicants who applied under the low THC law, and the second group of applicants who applied under the 2017 law. So, as I mentioned before, the law that was created in the summer of 2017 in that special session gave us what we have today. But since that has passed, since the amendment passed, and since the legislator enacted the rules, none of the deadlines have been met in the amendment or the rules the legislator implemented. And none of the licenses that the Department of Health was supposed to give out have been issued to any new companies. In addition, the law that was created in that summer, for every 100,000 patients registered for the medical program, the health department is required to issue 4 more licenses. In April of 2018, we hit 100,000 patients. Florida Department of Health never issued those 4 licenses. In July of 2018, a license was issued. That license arose out of, what do you think? A lawsuit. Nature's Way Nursery of Miami got a license. Nature's Way, in conjunction with 5 other nurseries, joined a lawsuit which resulted in a ruling by an administrative judge, John Van Lanningham, paving the way for a new license to be issued to Nature's Way. In July of 2018, Administrative Judge John Lanningham criticized the Office of Medical Marijuana Use for using a flawed system to rank each applicant. The judge accused the Department of Health of a colossal blunder with the scoring process that created a dumpster fire. Those were his words. So, in July of 2018, arising out of that litigation, that was the last new license that the Department of Health ever issued, which brings us to a total of 14. And remember, at this point, 1 license was supposed to go to a black farmer. This license still has not been issued, and that's important, which I'll explain later. So at this point, we're in December of last year. Florida has only approved 14 licenses, which is making the licenses a hot commodity. Florida has been experiencing licensing gridlock, and with efforts to issue additional licenses frozen by all of this litigation that's going on. Businesses that applied for the additional licenses are now frozen, and pretty frustrated. The health department was fending off at least 10 legal or administrative challenges, and it was also estimating it's going to need 1.5 million just to fight these lawsuits. So they're wasting a lot of taxpayer dollars with all this litigation if they would just implement the law correctly. A lot of these applicants who are interested have been waiting for a year and are burning through their resources. Some applicants put $500,000 to $1 million into applications for licensing that may never be completed. Okay, so bringing us up to what happened this week. Remember, at this point we have 14 licenses, but Governor Desantis this week said he will grant 8 more to bring us to a total of 22 licenses. These 8 applicants came from the original pool of applicants, the first group, that were not selected in the first round of applications under the low THC program. DeSantis' decision this week came out of a joint settlement agreement between the Department of Health. This move is linked to that recommendation order I mentioned that the administrative law judge issued back in June of 2018. Now, it was rumored that Rick Scott's administration was working out a deal with these applicants, but it really was DeSantis who settled the matter this week, which, in my opinion, is another W for DeSantis in the cannabis space, first by lifting the smoking ban, and now by issuing 8 more licenses. So under this joint agreement, 8 nurseries are now getting licenses. The 8 nurseries set out to receive a license are Bill's Nursery, DeLeon's Bromelads, Dewar Nurseries, Hart's Plant Nursery, Perkins Nursery, Redland Nursery, Spring Oaks Greenhouse, and Tree King Tree Farm. Now, these licenses that DeSantis just gave out, these applications were amongst the lowest scored under the low THC law. See, I take issue with this because some may deserve these licenses, maybe because of the flawed competitive process or the flawed scoring process that the administrative judge criticized back last summer, but others did not, and the original restrictions kept many good applicants from even applying under the old law. What's interesting about this round of licensing is that in exchange for receiving these licenses, these 8 new MMTCs have to agree to certain conditions laid out by Governor DeSantis. One main condition being that these MMTCs have to intend to provide enhanced patient access by locating a percentage of the locations within impoverished communities and rural areas that have been affected by natural disasters. This week's issuance says a lot about being early to the game in the cannabis space. It's going to take a lot for these new licensees to get their operations up to scale, maybe even years. I really don't know. But companies like Curaleaf and Trulieve are light years ahead of these guys, so I'm interested to see how this plays out. It's nice that these applicants finally get their licenses, but they had to wait 4 years. I don't think it should stop here. There has been a big push for including social equity provisions in states' cannabis laws. So this is where that one license that has not gone to a Pigford class yet hasn't been issued. This is where it becomes a problem because states right now in 2019 are not willing to settle for legislation that just has adult use or medical cannabis. They want social equity provisions in their state's cannabis laws. So for example, in New York recently, their legislator was about to pass an adult use law, but they couldn't agree on their social justice provisions. It's a major hurdle, but one, in my opinion, that's needed, and I'm happy lawmakers across the country are refusing to settle for just adult use or medical use. They want to help communities most affected by the war on drugs. So I think that giving the license to the Pigford class of a minority farmer, giving him or her the last license is flawed. It's disrespectful to that community, because now they're so late to the game. They should have been one of the first licenses. These licenses, guys, are going for so much money. In recent months, some licenses have been sold for over $50 million. Now, I get that policymakers don't want the market to be wide open. I see the argument how it's too hard to manage, too hard to regulate. And I think the administration is trying to open the market slowly in a measured way. At least that's how I like to see it, but who knows of the politics that are going on behind the scenes. But a large number of dispensaries is necessary. Now, I'm kind of getting off topic because now I'm talking about dispensary locations, not licenses. But Florida's geographic spread is huge. Pensacola is almost as far away from Miami as it is to Chicago. So I'd like to see more licenses phased in because I think, in my opinion, we're going to have around 800,000 to 1 million users in Florida. Probably more than that. But as I mentioned, these licenses are worth $50 million or more, and a lot of the licenses winners have ended up selling them. Um, the majority of the licenses issued are inactive. Some licenses have only delivered one order to one patient, and they're just holding the license as an asset. This is anti capitalist and, in my opinion, acting against the basic conservative values that DeSantis is built on. By limiting the number of businesses to get involved in this industry, and forcing this vertical integration, it's making the market less competitive. That's why Florida Grown is still upset with DeSantis' action this week. Florida Grown and other applicants are upset that DeSantis is continuing what he himself called a cartel. This is a complicated issue, and DeSantis did say he would fix the licensing requirements and the mandated vertical integration, but this is not what these applicants were hoping for. I'm interested to see what happens when we go adult use, potentially in 2020 or whenever it happens, because we're going to have a bigger problem. We're going to have adult use cannabis available, but the government has shown it's going to limit how much is available. It took us 2 years to get smokable cannabis, even when the amendment was passed. If adult use passes and we only have these limited companies selling, we're going to have a supply problem and a price problem because it's anti-competitive. I predict all of these new licenses that DeSantis just issued will be sold to companies that have more capital. I think one might not be, and that's Bill's Nursery. I think they'll stay.